Right. So map work. Um, so this is going to be kind of like a fairly general overview. I'll try not to get too specific, but some of it you kind of got to get into the nitty gritty a little bit to kind of understand the implementation. But so grand scheme of things, I'll just get right to it. Map work, otherwise known as max aerobic power, and I put the little note there that by aerobic, anytime we mean that, what we mean is that it's sustainable. So that'll be an important thing to keep in mind as you kind of think about the time domains and the application of the training itself. So what map work is, I think there's kind of two parts, kind of two major parts to it. It's a way to provide structure and progression to aerobic training, and it's an interval-based system that's performed with the intent of sustainability. So those are kind of like the major things that you kind of have to think about, and just kind of understanding what it is and why we use it. So the purpose, I believe, is that it's as much for the coach as it is for the client. So basically what it does is that it creates context to capacity training, where a lot of the traditional approaches are kind of just random. Even if there is some planning, there's not really ever a way to know that the stimulus of a lot of workouts are being met. So it creates context to the stimulus. It allows for a coach to cover bases and truly know that they're progressing from a foundational point up to a performance point. It allows for an athlete to learn pacing in different movements, different types of movements, different combinations of movements in different time domains. It's for volume accumulation, and it can also be very, very helpful in weakness training. So like I said, I think it's as much for the athlete to get all these things as it is for the coach to be able to have a structure to progression of work capacity. So how we implement it, it's always, at least at the foundational level, implemented in an endurance first, progress to power last. So we always work from the endurance end down to more powerful work, with basically the idea there being that the wider base that you create for yourself is going to allow for the greatest potential. So first, what you would do is working within a certain time domain, you would work under your race pace, and we'll learn a little bit more kind of what that means here in a second. But starting under your race pace, progressing to your race pace, then we would increase volume, and then we increase pace. So those are kind of like the steps that you have to take in performing a MAP progression. Movement wise, you want to work simple to complex. So someone who's maybe new to this type of training, you wouldn't want to put a bunch of muscle ups and barbell cycling or high skill strict gymnastics pieces in this, because the purpose is going to be first to build sustainability, which is going to require that someone's doing simpler movements first and learning really how to apply it, and learning what their pacing ability is within a given time domain. And then over time, as the athlete advances and learns how to perform this type of work, then you can work to more complex patterns. And then in general, you would like to try to stay within a MAP cycle or a MAP progression for 8 weeks. There's going to be some variance to that, and who it is that you're working with, how you're applying it, and those kinds of things. But really at the foundational level, you'd like to stay within kind of a time domain range for 8 weeks to allow for the athlete to dial in their pace, for there to be some progression of the total duration of work that they're doing, increasing volume and total pieces. As well as sometimes you can use a progression of reducing rest in between intervals and then increasing total blocks. So those are ways that within the 8 weeks of progression, you will kind of create variance to force adaptation. So one little note here. This is specific to CrossFit athletes, and I use I want to mention this obviously because that's what we're thinking about whenever we're thinking about how we're going to apply this. So most CrossFit athletes that we're working with are going to be able to express work capacity at pretty much any point in the spectrum. So basically what I mean by that is that they may not need to start at the top or the slowest point of the progression before building up. We may be able to select points within the whole progression based on their need or their perceived weaknesses, and then work on them and just make sure that the communication is there in how they're supposed to be approaching them. So what I mean by that, and we'll kind of get into the numbers a little bit. So MAP work starts at MAP 10. This is the longest duration interval. If you were working with someone that's novice and hasn't exercised in years, that they're looking for more fitness and health, this is where you would start them almost no matter what, before progressing them down the list of faster and shorter paces. However, a CrossFit athlete, since they've built a pretty solid foundation of work capacity, they don't need to start by doing a full 8 weeks of MAP 10 work before moving to MAP 9, before moving to MAP 8, etc. We may be able to use kind of different touch points within the whole progression, and having it implemented on multiple days each week, and then working them up from that. So again, I'll kind of show you what that might look like. So what are my other notes here? So yeah, we can also, so at the foundational novice level, we would want to really enforce that all work that's being done is sustainable, and that's just to really make sure you're covering bases and you're not allowing for someone to work more intensely than what they're going to truly be able to express or recover from. A CrossFit athlete, however, has already learned how to adapt and recover from a lot of different durations, intensities, and types of work. So we can let these athletes get away with being maybe slightly faster than what their true sustainable or race pace might be, as long as there's some self-awareness in how to apply it. And one thing that's really helpful, and that this can kind of work as a really great framework for, is to do incremental or threshold training. And so I'll again show you how that might be applied. And then another thing, so generally if we were working with someone that's new to this type of training, they're going to, like I said, they'll do a full 8 weeks of only MAP 10 work, a full 8 weeks of only MAP 9 work, etc., working their way down the list. I find that for CrossFit athletes, sometimes at the faster end range of this progression, so this would be like MAP 1, 2, 3, or 4, that they may actually be able to apply all those paces within the same session. So again, I'll show you what it looks like, but I find that these shorter duration intervals, we can kind of mix up these things, or even do a progression week to week of all 4 of these. And it just seems to kind of work a little bit better in applying the type of training that a lot of CrossFit athletes need to be doing or want to be doing. So again, why? Number one answer is volume accumulation. CrossFit training tends to mimic the format of CrossFit testing. So that would look like, if you're working on 12-minute time domain, we'll use that as the example since that's so common in CrossFit. If someone was, that time range domain was challenging for them, let's say that they are someone who prefers more of like a 5 to 7 minute workout, more of a higher threshold type workout, and anything after 10 minutes they start to kind of break down a little bit. So if they were wanting to get better at that, the general format would just be have them do 12 to 15 minute AMRAP workouts multiple times a week, where they're just trying to get as high of a score on whatever random movements we decide to put in there. So what that would look like a lot of times is going to be this orange line, and this chart, the x-axis of this is just time or duration, and the y-axis is maximal sustainable pace for a given time domain. So that's pretty complex, and it's a little bit empirical because it's hard to actually calculate that. But we'll kind of just use it for context. So most of the time in, say, this 12-minute AMRAP, an athlete's pace is going to start actually faster than their 12-minute sustainable pace. So they're going to start somewhere up here. It's going to slowly slow down over the course of the first few minutes. They're going to maybe hang out for a couple minutes at what is their actual 12-minute race pace. Then it's going to start to drop below because the fatigue from starting too fast will start to set in. They'll have to find kind of a balancing point at this slower pace, and then maybe towards the end of the workout, they'll speed up a little bit, try to make a little push, and then boom, workout's done. So at best, they're only spending a couple minutes actually training their 12-minute race pace. A MAP 5 training piece, on the other hand, which we'll learn here in a second, MAP 5 is a three roughly minute interval performed at their 12-minute race pace. So a MAP 5 training session, what did I just do there? A MAP 5 training session is going to be a 3-minute interval at their 12-minute race pace, 2-minute rest period. 3-minute interval at 12-minute race, rest, 3 minutes, rest, 3 minutes, rest, where we might be able to do, 6 to potentially 10 3-minute intervals with 2 minutes of rest in between. And as long as sustainability is the focus for that 3 minutes, they're going to get to spend 18 plus minutes at their 12-minute race pace. So it's a way to train gears or train paces with actual context. And as long as you can communicate with an athlete that the score doesn't matter as much as the building basically their fastest sustainable effort within that 3-minute interval is the focus, then it can be hugely beneficial in building volume and learning pacing and gears for athletes. So this is basically kind of a breakdown of every MAP cycle or every MAP pace, essentially. So we've got MAP 10. I'm not going to cover every single detail on this. It breaks it down pretty solid, and you'll start to kind of see the pattern. But basically, what we're seeing here is that each interval is going to be 1/4, 25% of the perceived race pace. So 60-minute, a MAP 10 is a 60-minute interval performed at a pace that could be sustained for up to 4 hours. So for most people, this is very low intensity, essentially active recovery type work. MAP 9 is a 20 to 40, or we'll use 30-minute interval as the average interval performed at a pace that could be sustained for up to 2 hours. So it's a 2-hour race pace. 30 minutes is 1/4 of 2 hours. So you'll kind of start to see the pattern here. MAP 8 is a 12 to 20-minute interval or 15-minute interval performed at a pace that could be sustained for up to 1 hour. So you can see the relationship there. The interval that was performed is 25% of the race pace that we are trying to achieve. MAP 7 is an 8 to 12-minute or 10-minute interval performed at a pace that could be sustained for up to 40 minutes. And etc. down the line. MAP 6 is a 4 to 6 or 5-minute interval that could be performed at a pace, or that is performed at a pace that could be sustained for up to 20 minutes. So again, 1/4. MAP 5, 3-minute, that could be sustained for up to 12. MAP 4 is a 2-minute interval that could be sustained for up to 8. MAP 3 is a 90-second interval that could be sustained for up to 6 minutes. MAP 2 is a 1-minute interval that could be sustained for up to 4 minutes. And then MAP 1 is a 30-second interval that could be sustained for up to 2 minutes. So you can see the pattern there that the interval you're performing is always 1/4 or 25% of the quote perceived race pace or intended race pace. So like I said, the way that you would work this is you would start at the slower range, build volume, build capacity, and then boom, as you work your way down, you're decreasing the interval durations, but you're increasing the pace. Sorry, I might have mixed that up. You're decreasing the interval durations, but you're increasing the pace that you're trying to achieve. And so these each will just kind of break down that. Okay, let's say we're using MAP 8, for example. It's a 12 to 20-minute interval. Within a training session, you'll perform it for 2 to 4 pieces. You can do this 1 to 2 times per week. Rest in between intervals is 5 to 10 minutes, and the relative intensity is 80% aerobic or slightly faster than conversational pace. Repeatability measure. So you'll see on each one of these categories that I've marked the repeatability measure as being either intra-set or inter-set. So what I mean by this is that, let's say map 10, we're doing an hour of aerobic work. The repeatability measure, i.e. making sure that the athlete is working at a sustainable pace, is intra-set repeatability. So let's say we're just putting them on a Concept 2 bike for 60 minutes. We would maybe, as an easy way to kind of break down, set the monitor to be a 10-minute interval. And within every 10-minute interval, they should be recording basically the same total distance traveled and average pace. And so that intra-set repeatability across that 1 hour is how we make sure that they're performing it sustainably. Not the first 30 minutes, they're averaging 2 minutes per 1,000, and then in the last 30 minutes, they're averaging 220 per 1,000. Then we know that they didn't perform that sustainable. And they need to, next time they perform that, adjust their pacing a little bit to where it's a little bit slower at the beginning, so that then they don't have that drop off in their pace. So map 9, also intra-set, so within that 20 to 40 or 30 minute interval, within that each round of whatever it is that they're doing, or however you want to measure it, they should be working sustainable within that set. Same thing with map 8. Map 7 could actually probably be intra-set or inter-set. So most times can be intra-set, especially with the way that we're going to tend to apply it with athletes, but it could be either. So what the inter-set repeatability would look like is, let's say they're doing 5-minute row, rest 3, 5-minute bike, rest 3, and they're going to do that for 3 sets. So all 3 sets, this should be the same. All 3 sets of bike, this should be the same. So that's inter-set repeatability. We would make sure that within each one of those, they don't start too hot, they don't start too slow. It should look roughly the same across each of the 3 5-minute rows, and then roughly the same output across each of the 5-minute bikes. So obviously that makes more sense with these shorter duration intervals, that they're going to be doing repeats of them rather than single sets. Okay, so again, I'm not going to go through every single little detail. I'll share this with you so that you can review it and kind of get a feel for what all this means. So I noted at the beginning, one thing I want to touch on real quick, I noted at the beginning that everything within this needs to be sustainable. So where that gets especially challenging is in these shorter duration intervals. So a lot of times when athletes see a 30-second interval, they think that it's a lactic interval. However, we are doing 30 seconds of work and 30 seconds of rest for 10 to 15 plus pieces. And I've even done training sessions that are 40 sets of 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, all at a sustainable pace. So the key here is that this is not lactic. This is still aerobic, sustainable work. And we should be using that inter-set repeatability to make sure that we're achieving that. So that's the big thing that you really have to tell or communicate properly with athletes, is that at the bottom of this range, even the 1 minute, the 130s, a lot of times athletes will see that and they think that it should be performed as a max effort sprint and then hold on for dear life, but we want to make sure that they're still performing this aerobically. If you want to talk about lactic progressions, I got all the notes on that. Lactic progressions start at the shorter end and then they build longer. So very different application. To one workout could be a map 1 where it's like this 30 seconds of work times 30 with 30 seconds of rest for 10 to 15 pieces, and something like 30 seconds of work times 5 pieces with, and let's see, this would be 30 seconds rest between. This is an aerobic workout. 5 minutes rest between here would be a lactic workout, right? So that's how you would kind of just know that this obviously can't be max effort if you're going to be able to get the same amount of work done within each of these 30-second intervals, okay? So I'm going to go over just some real quick training examples, just to kind of show you how this can be applied, and I'll show you some of my training stuff. So I'll just note that, like, what I program for myself usually, especially in my like off season time frame, let's say, is my conditioning stuff is almost exclusively map work, because it just makes it simple in making sure that I'm working some short, some long, and some everything in between. And for me, it just I like the application of it, and just making it easy progressions from week to week. So we'll start at the kind of longer end here, so map 9, and most of these are going to be things that I would apply with specific. So map 9, this is like a quick 3-week progression. Week 1 might look like 30 minutes of cycling through 500-meter row, 1,000-meter bike, 500-meter ski, 300-meter run. Week 2, 32 minutes, build up the volume of each one just a little bit. Week 3, 34 minutes, building up the volume, and you could basically kind of just continue this progression. You could do this for up to 8 weeks, where eventually you get to like 42 or 44, whatever minutes of easy aerobic work. So map 9 we know is a interval that could be sustained for up to 2 hours. So this is not going to be super, super hard pace, but it's just going to be aerobic volume accumulation. Map 7, one of my favorite ones, of just great for like off-season volume building and mixed volume accumulation and pacing work. This is a session that I've literally done this workout probably, I don't know, 10 times in my life. So 10 minutes, 15/12 cal row, 10 alternating dumbbell power snatch at 75/50, 5 box jump step down 30 inches, 24 inches for women. So controlling some of the contractions, not super high volume. This is obviously with someone who's a little bit more skilled. In this second interval, 12/9 cal bike, 9 wall ball shots, 6 bar muscle ups. Got to really challenge sustainability here. If someone was maybe a little bit less skilled or had a little bit less gymnastics endurance, you could drop this down to where it's something they can come to each round and make sure that they're able to repeat it. And then another 10-minute interval here at the end, 9 cal ski, 6 front rack walking lunges, 3 burpees over bar. So just an example, some nice 10-minute intervals, 4 minutes rest between. Map 6. So this is an example of a map 6, end of a map 6 progression. I find map 6 to be really, really solid in transitioning from either a lower skill and loading to higher skill and loading. So you'd start the beginning of the map progression like a little bit easier, more aerobic and very sustainable contractions. Towards the end of the progression, putting higher skill, higher challenge progressions. And of course, this is as long as it's something that the athlete is able to perform. But that map 6 tends to be a good solid time duration, this 4 to 6 minute time range, where it's not going to get to be so long that they're starting to hit failure on anything. So good there. Or also map 6 I also find to be really good for as a transition between off season to in season, because again it's kind of this middle duration or moderate duration and intensity that can kind of start to help progress and build a more in season training point to that's going to be more intense and more challenging. So it's good kind of building volume. So I was using that transition. So you can see here, this is at the end of a progression where the contractions are more challenging. We're doing some squat snatch, some push jerks, some squat cleans, all being done as singles, at least the from the floor stuff being done as singles at moderate to tough loads, so that we can make sure that the pace is appropriate and we're not jacking the heart rate up a bunch on any given piece within the 5-minute interval. Map 5, like I said, map 6 to map 5 is a great transition into in-season training or intensification. So this is a good chance to get in some like lighter weight barbell stuff. These 3-minute intervals are really, really important, obviously, because we've said that 3-minute intervals are a 12-minute race pace. So that's obviously very common in like the open and quarterfinals. So um, I like that. So here's an example of a week to week progression from week 4. You got, again, kind of some aerobic barbell gymnastics, touching a little bit of everything, and then kind of gradually increasing the duration and the intensity across the progression. Map 3, I wanted to show kind of like good application of incremental. So I talked about how we can kind of let CrossFit athletes get away with being slightly unsustainable. So this is an example of a workout I did recently. Minute 30, so this is map 3, minute 30, AMRAP, minute 30 rest for 8 sets, 4 burpee box jump overs, 4 dumbbell thrusters, 6 chest to bar pull-ups. These are my scores for this workout: 1 plus 8, 1 plus 9, 1 plus 10, 1 plus 13, 2 plus 0, 2 plus 2, 2 plus 3, 2 plus 5. So you can see the incremental pacing across my 8 sets. These first couple were like not really that hard. They were more just kind of like figuring out my pace and breathing, getting warmed up a little bit. These were probably more in my range of being sustainable, where I could probably do this pace for up to 6 minutes, right? I could have continued to do 1 plus 10 reps every minute 30 for 6 minutes. These last few were a little closer to threshold. So these were like I was really sprinting to get these done. So that would be an example of an incremental implementation of map work. And then I think this is the last one. So I said earlier, these shorter durations, I really like using 1 through 4 in a combo session. It's great for high power and pacing training. Getting aerobic athletes to train a little bit faster and a little bit higher threshold while still keeping it sustainable and not making it like true lactic or failure work. But the big thing here is just making sure that you're using movements that can be done with short transitions. Since the duration of the interval is so short, you can't have pieces of this that are a 10 to 15 second transition, or else you're not really truly working for the 1 minute interval or the 30-second interval. So this is an example of a session that is using map 1, 2, 3, and 4. So 30-second ski, 30-second rest, 60-second dumbbell work, 60-second rest, 90 seconds of some easy contractions that can be transitioned pretty quickly, and then 2 minutes of some short, fast pieces that, again, could be transitioned pretty quickly. 2 minutes rest, you go through that twice, rest an extra 5 minutes, and then another 2-set block of some of these higher power output movements. So these are all like very basic implementations of just basically turning them into like AMRAPs, or what we would call like circuits, essentially. But some other examples of how you could do it would be chippers, constant variance. The key with these is that it requires a little bit more knowledge of the athlete to know that you're going to be able to predict their ability and what they're going to be able to do for these pieces. But again, it's just going to allow for some variance in the structure and training and progression of the athlete. But it is, like I said, a little bit more challenging for the coach to ensure that the athlete is performing these appropriately, but certainly can be done. So one example would be chipper, where obviously you would set the amount of work rather than setting the duration. But again, you're going to have to kind of guess that it's going to fit within the time range that you're wanting to try to train. So you got to make sure you alter the loading, the reps, and the patterns to ensure that you're keeping it within this structure. So here's an example of that. This is a good map 6 chipper format. I've done this workout before, and it's all my intervals were between 4 and 5 minutes. So you can see how that would be applied there. Another example is constant variance. So this is an example of a map 7 constant variance. So it's basically the same. It's a chipper format. But what you're going to do is you're going to rotate the order of movements every round. So you're going to basically just allow for the athlete, write it out one way, and then tell the athlete every round, change the order of movements. So you're going to still do the same amount of work, but you're going to rotate what order you do them in so that you can work on sustainability no matter what combinations of movements you might see. So just an example here is like, can you do the toes to bar right into the dumbbell snatch and stay at the same pace if your grip is a little bit fatigued, just for example. And then the last one is time-dependent repeats. So what you would do here is that you would set a clock, something like every 5 minutes for 6 sets. Something like a 12, 9, 6, 3 calorie row and lateral burpee over the rower, and then rest the remainder of the 5 minutes. So you're again kind of predicting how long is it going to take the athlete to perform the work, and their rest time is going to depend a little bit on how quickly they get it done. What you have to do here is just provide a backup strategy just in case, so that they're able to get all the work done. So let's say that the athlete, a round takes longer than 3 minutes. You want to tell them on here, if the round takes longer than 3:30, extend your interval to every 6 minutes rather than every five. So give yourself a little extra rest time so that you can keep it sustainable. Okay. So that's, like I said, sorry, this is already 30 minutes long. Very broad overview of map work. I'll show you, like I said, whenever I'm in like an off season. So this was January, so I guess this was kind of open prep. But for me, that time of the season is really not what I would consider like in season. I pretty much like every single day I'm doing map work. So Monday is map 5, so 3-minute intervals, weightlifting in the afternoon. Tuesday map 7, so we started a little bit shorter. Next day go a little bit longer. Okay. One thing to note here, so I go long, and then my Tuesday afternoons was like some max effort alactic stuff. So then the next morning I wanted to have an easy one. So this is basically map 9, so I wanted to go long again. Map 9. So we went map 5, map 7, map 9. This is basically map 8. So I've got a few days in a row here of some longer stuff, but that's just because I know that I'm working some higher power stuff. So then Friday was a map 1, 2, 3, and then eventually actually map 1, 2, 3, and 4 progression here. So this was obviously higher power, and then Saturday was map 5. It was actually basically map 6, map 7, and map 8, all in one session. So each one of these days for me has a specific focus. So this day was my map 8 stuff was really meant to be like some higher duration sets. So each week on this stuff, I made these sets a little bit longer. My map 5 was basically every single week an aerobic plus a weightlifting movement, pretty much. Or eventually got to that. So and then like just for example, my map 6, 7, and 8 on these Saturdays was gymnastics focused. So you see burpee bar muscle ups, box jump overs, keeping handstand push-ups, chest to bars, rope climbs. So everything on my Saturdays was supposed to be like challenging my gymnastics capacity. So like I said, it's a good way to also structure working on specific things or kind of specific weaknesses. So you can see here that I'm not only doing one map session or whatever. Every single day that I'm doing conditioning here, I just will use map work as my context and how I'm going to apply it, basically. So just an example. I think that pretty much covers it. Let me know if you have any questions. I'd love to show you some other training programs or whatever would be helpful in helping you to kind of understand how this can be applied and why you use it.